So we, as I said, this is our presentation on caregiver compensation. And this is a big issue for people in our state that have children and youth and loved ones with disabilities. And so we're excited to give this information to you tonight, and we hope that it will answer some of your questions. We are going to cover quite a few things, but we'll stay on to answer your questions. So as we go through the presentation tonight, please put your questions in the chat. We have a few people on board tonight that will help us answer these questions. We have Colleen Kenny from the Utah Parent Center and Utah Family Voices. And we also have Lisa Thornton, who's an attorney on with us tonight. And Lisa is a phenomenal advocate for the disability community, and she was a major player in helping to get caregiver compensation passed through the legislature. So we're grateful for everybody who's carved out some time tonight. If you have to leave early, we will be sending this recording to you, so you don't need to worry about missing out. And we also have some other information that we'll email out after this. Okay. So as in the way of introductions, we have Mindy Rivera. She's unable to be with us tonight due to some family complications, but I wanted to introduce Mindy and have you get to know her face and what she does with the Parent Center. She's part of the Family to Family Network, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And then I'm Jenny Dopp, and I work on two projects here at the center. I work on transition to adulthood. So all of the families and youth who are ages 14 to about 22, 26, preparing for adulthood, and watch for our flyers on Transition Tuesday. And we cover a different topic every single month, whether it's guardianship or estate planning or employment, whatever that is. And then I also work with waiver information and helping families learn about coming off the wait list and into services. And then we also have Deanna Wall with us tonight, who will be presenting the majority of this information to you. And she works directly with families who are in services with DSPD. So if we can have Colleen, I think was the last one to log in under this login. So if you'll launch that poll for us. We are funded through grants and donations. And so our funders require us to capture some information that tells them who we serve and how many people we serve. And so this isn't any personal information that you'll want to share. It's just really specific. So if you'll just take a minute and fill out that poll for us, that would be great. Did that launch okay, Colleen? Okay, perfect. All right, so that family to family network that I talked about, this is one of the projects of the Utah Parent Center. It's part of the Utah Parent Center. And the family to family network is a statewide network, and it educates, strengthens, and supports families, whether you're on the waiting list for services with DSPD or you are in services. You can participate either way. So for instance, I live in Davis County, and so I'm part of the Davis County Family to Family Network, and I receive all of their flyers. It's fun things like Easter egg hunts or Halloween parties or potluck nights, but there's also an education piece that takes place whenever we go to meetings. And so it's a great way for you to connect with other families in your area. I know for me, like even my close siblings, they don't quite understand the significance of what our family goes through every day. And so sometimes it's great to get together with other people who walk in your shoes. And that's what the Family to Family Network is for, is to help you have support while you're waiting for services or while you're in services. Okay, a little disclaimer. We are going to talk a lot about taxes tonight and caregiver compensation, how that might impact you financially, how that might impact your benefits, things like Medicaid or housing vouchers or different things like that. So we just want to make sure that we disclose that the Utah Parent Center is unable to provide tax advice. Please work with a tax professional on this question. Please refer to the links, which I'll put in the chat, or if Deanna or Colleen has the slides up, if you guys will put that in the chat from this slide, it's down below in the notes. But these are two links that we have for you that are directly from the IRS that would be helpful for you. And if you are using a tax professional, feel free to share this information with them, because this is new. These are new programs that have only been around, you know, through COVID and then just now permanently. So everybody's kind of getting the hang of this, and there's people that might still be unfamiliar with it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what caregiver compensation is. And you might think, okay, this is really boring, Jenny. I'm going to shut my brain off while you say all of this, and then I'll pay attention when you talk about something else. But it is important that you understand where this money is coming from. And the reason for that is depending upon where the money comes from will determine how it impacts you. So let me just tell you the little timeline on how this all started. So during the beginning of COVID, it was about 2019, Senate Bill 237 required that the Utah Department of Health, in consultation with the Department of Health and Human Services, at the time they were two separate departments and now they're all one, but that bill required to develop a proposal for reimbursing an individual's family members for personal care services that constitute extraordinary care. And you'll remember during that time, for those of you who were in services, it was really hard to find caregivers during COVID. It was really hard to find employees. And so they were trying to find a solution for that. And the department sought feedback from parents, spouses, and other stakeholders and performed a review of other state statutes, policies, and programs. And this was an effort to keep families in DSPD services safely at home. I know a lot of us had children who were high risk, and it was really challenging. So in 2020, funding for caregivers in the services began, and the funding by the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, which is CARES, that's an important word to remember, so the CARES Act money, these services were meant to end in December of 2020. In 2021, because of the funding provided through the CARES Act and advocacy efforts, like I mentioned before, during the 2021 legislative session, there was this movement on the DSPD waiting list for the first time in 4 years. As you remember, there were years where none of us made it off the list, which led to additional funding through the American Rescue Plan Act, which is ARPA money. So we have CARES money, and now we have ARPA money until June of this year. So this means that families who were on the waiting list were able to get one-time services until June of 2023. Some of you may have gotten those phone calls, and it does not mean that you are necessarily in DSPD services, but that you were selected for one-time services, and caregiver compensation is an option to receive with that ARPA funding. If you received this call or email, please work with your waitlist worker to understand what funding you were selected for. And in 2022, they geared up to advocate for Senate Bill 106. And Senate Bill 106, this is where Lisa was up there at the Capitol testifying. We had families testifying. It was a big deal. And in 2023, March, just last month, the Governor Cox signed that bill, and it is now permanent. And just a little plug for our advocacy list. Legislators are elected, every election. There's different legislators elected, and they may or may not know about Medicaid services. They may not understand. They may just be a first-time member of the Health and Human Services Committee. They might not get what our families go through every day. And so it's really important for them to hear from us and to advocate for waitlist funding. So write yourself a note. If you're not already part of the Utah Parent Center's advocacy email list, please go on our website, and at the bottom you can select subscribe, and it will give you an option to pick which list you want to subscribe to, but please subscribe to that advocacy list. So, November, December, January of next year, when there's a hot disability legislative issue up, that you can be part of that advocacy network to help us get these bills passed, because without all of you, the legislators won't know that this is important. Okay, so with that said, caregiver compensation, as most of you know, because you're here, is a reimbursement to an individual's family member for personal care services. So a caregiver can be paid up to 40 hours per week to provide direct care to their loved one, or it's a one-time respite when you get this funding if you're sitting on the wait list. And you need to be a parent or a spouse or a guardian of an individual with a disability, and you're living with them in that house. So caregiver compensation is just one little slice of the DSPD pie of services offered to you. And your loved one with a disability may need other services to help with their total care. And it's called a person-centered support plan. And for those of us, like I have a son, Jackson, he's 22. We've been sitting on the wait list for about 10 years, and we probably won't make it off for quite some time because of where we sit, how high we are on the wait list. But if he were to come off, they would do an assessment and help to create this person-centered support plan. And so based upon your plan about what they feel like you need and what I disclose and what Jackson discloses, they would set up this plethora of services, or this variety of services that would help Jackson. Now, I want to tell you about a brand new resource that is coming out within the next week, possibly 2 weeks. And it is this guidebook, a guide to understanding HCBS waivers. Now, I'm mindful that many of you on this call tonight are already in services. You already have waiver services, you already have a support coordinator, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this was a waste of time to join. But hold on just a second and stay with me, because we want to make sure that everybody on the call has the same knowledge. And so for people who are on the wait list, who've never been allowed to play in the pool of waivers, they don't know a lot of this terminology. And also, if you've been in services for a long time, it's important for you to know about this resource, because there's maybe things that you aren't utilizing. Maybe there's aspects that frustrate you, and this would help you navigate things a little bit better. So stick with me for the next couple of slides, and we'll get through this, but we just want to make sure everybody has the same knowledge to start with, because disability services, especially when you get into other benefits, it does get complicated and confusing. So accessing caregiver compensation can happen either by coming off the wait list into HCBS, which stands for Home and Community-Based Services, or in other words, waiver services, or you can get access to it through a one-time funding. And our family's been able to access the one-time funding 2 different times because of different funding options. So it is important to be on the wait list. If you're not on the wait list right now and you're just considering it, please join. When funding comes through, many families feel overwhelmed and confused. And for those on the wait list who get one-time funding, the language is all new. Who is a support coordinator? And they're called an SCE. And what is their role? What is a provider, or who is a provider? What if I want to change providers? How do I find providers? How can I use my budget? What is a person-centered support plan, or a PCSP? And why is it so important? What is the settings rule? What are budget codes? What is SAS? How do I access Caregiver Comp through the SAS model? And what if I want to change my PCSP? So in the next 2 weeks, this guidebook, we just thought it would be just this little, 20-page book. We're well over 100 pages now. And you can flip through this book. If you have a question, you'll just turn to the support coordinator section, or you'll just turn to the fiscal agent section, whatever you need. But this will be released as a resource tool. We'll have it on our publications tab and also the DSPD tab on our website. And I will make sure and get an email out to our entire Utah Parent Center email list when it comes out. And I will also try to post it in some Facebook forums so that you can have access to it. This is a work in progress. This has never been done before. And we've had several people vet the book. The Disability Law Center, DSPD has vetted it. We've had parents work on it. We've had all of the different agency providers look at it. And so we feel like it's really close, but if you look at the book and you see something that's wrong or confusing, we would love your feedback on this tool. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. So this is Ben, and Ben's case study will help to paint a picture of how a family can navigate coming off the wait list and some of the choices they get to make based on what would be best for their loved one. And this is just one example. Every single family on this call is kind of in a different situation. And so it's going to look a little bit different for everyone. Okay, so Ben's case study.
You need help.
Oh, go ahead. No, we're good. Okay. I want to make sure these animations work for you. So here is Lisa, who is Ben's temporary DSPD transition coordinator. So Lisa either calls or emails Ben that in 2 months, Ben finally gets the call that he is coming off the dreaded wait list. In the meantime, Lisa is going to conduct assessments and create Ben's initial PCSP, or that person-centered support plan. And Lisa will also be assisting Ben in accessing Medicaid, since he does not currently have Medicaid. Lisa explains to Ben how she will establish a budget for him based on the assessment she will complete, And Lisa also explains to Ben about the need for a support coordinator or an SCE. If Ben is unable to find an SCE, Lisa can help him. And Lisa may also help Ben set up and find providers. After interviewing several support coordinators or SCEs, Ben decides to select Jane as his SCE. Jane has 30 days to meet with Ben, and Jane will review the assessments and the budget given to him by Lisa. And Jane will update Ben's PCSP and help Ben find providers if he does not have any already in place, and ways for Ben to meet the goals identified in Ben's PCSP, which is a tool that's used to help Ben and his staff meet his goals. Okay, so this is where caregiver compensation comes in. Ben can either choose a provider model, which would be hiring an outside agency or company to provide those services, or Ben can use a SaaS model, which is a self-administered model. And that would be like me hiring my neighbor or me hiring people I know to come in and care for Jackson, or I can use a combination of both. If Ben chooses a SaaS model, which is that self-administered model, he also has the option to choose caregiver compensation. Jane, the SCE, will be Ben's guide and help Ben understand his budget, his goals, and services, and help Ben interview and hire providers if he doesn't have them already. The SCE will oversee Ben's budget and billing, track and document Ben's progress, and advocate for Ben. If Ben chooses a provider model, providers will send reports to Jane, who is the SCE, monthly, and Jane will review for compliance and report back to DSPD. If Ben chooses that SaaS model, the self-administered model, where caregiver compensation falls under SaaS, Ben will hire a fiscal agent who's kind of like a provider, but they handle and help with managing all the payroll and helping with budgeting and completing paperwork. Now, there's one gray area with this. We don't typically talk about a specific provider, but there is a company called Give.Care, and it's kind of a gray area. They're an agency, but they're also acting as like a fiscal agent. So SaaS and caregiver compensation payments are paid through a fiscal agent, whether you use care.com or a different fiscal agent. So in this scenario, Ben chooses caregiver compensation and he needs to work through a fiscal agent. Okay, so now that you have all that groundwork, we made it through. Now let's get to the caregiver compensation and how this works. So here's this chart, right? So here we are at the top, Jackson and I, and we apply for DSPD. And because of when they do the assessment, they decide, okay, is it critical? Is this a crisis where Jackson needs immediate funding? If he does, he goes right into waiver services. But for the majority of individuals, I can't even give you a percentage, but a really high level of individuals, most of us will go over here on the left-hand side to the wait list. And we'll sit there for many years or until something in our situations change. Now, if you're like me and you're sitting on the wait list, make sure that you keep in touch with your DSPD coordinator and you're updating it, not just yearly, but if something changes, like for instance, my husband, he was diagnosed with cancer. So we went and updated our profile and added that. I have rheumatoid arthritis, so we updated it and put that on there. We lost his older sister, she moved away, and so that she was part of his caregiving support. So we updated when that change happened. There were behavior issues at school, so we updated our profile then. Whatever updates you are constantly putting on there will change the placement that you are, the number you are on the list. So really important you keep in contact, and this is where you tell all of the situations that are really hard and how that's impacting your family so that you can have a true place on the wait list that reflects the needs of your youth and the implications on the family. So we're sitting on the wait list and we get a one-time funding. And remember, this is funded through ARPA or CARES. And if it's coming through that path, then there's a chance that the income could be taxable on federal and state because it's coming through ARPA and CARES. It might not be. And so it's important that you work with your tax professional and to see what will work best for your situation. And we're going to talk about this later, but this arrow next to it where in the red, income could impact benefits like SSI, housing, voucher, etc. We are going to take a huge chunk of time to talk about that. But I just want to make sure you understand the difference with this left side. If you're on the wait list and you get the caregiver compensation, it could be taxable. It might not be, but also we had some questions earlier from a different presentation, and people hear caregiver compensation and they think it's available to just anyone. It has to come through DSPD. So it will you have to first apply to DSPD, and you have to be either on the wait list or in services. You can't just be a random parent and that's not connected with DSPD in any way. On the right-hand side is a different situation. And I have this arrow going from on the wait list over to services, because it's possible for Jackson to get off the wait list and go into services. And when that happens, then he's automatically in this blue column on the right. Oops, this slide's here. Let me go back. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Okay, so Jackson's now in services. He made it off the wait list, and oh my gosh, it's just so sensitive tonight, you guys. I'm gonna not move my mouse at all. Okay, he's now in services and he's funded. And so when he receives, when I could receive caregiver compensation, because I'm in services and the funding is paid through Medicaid waivers, that money is not taxable. So we're going to go into this through in more detail tonight, but it's not taxable for federal or state, but it still could impact your benefits. And again, we'll talk about that, but I just wanted to introduce this concept. And also, it's really important that you understand some vocabulary tonight so that you're not confused. The difference between the word taxable and reportable. So the way that we're using that word tonight is that taxable means what you're reporting to the IRS and if they're withholding FICA and all of the pieces that go with taxation. When I say reportable, it's what they track for benefit eligibility, things like SSI, housing vouchers, those types of things. So if we use the word reportable tonight, we're not talking about reporting to the IRS, we're talking about reporting for disability eligibility. Okay, so again, when you come off that wait list and you receive the notification, they're going to do that assessment, and it's called a UCANS, which is your needs assessment report. And that needs assessment report is going to define exactly what you need. So when you get that call that you're coming off the wait list, you need to be very honest about the situation that your youth is facing, or that the adult with disabilities is facing, and how that's impacting the caregivers. Because based upon what you disclose, they're going to create this budget and identify the supports that you need. So with caregiver compensation, the bullets that I have listed there are the different service codes. They're not actual codes, because you wouldn't understand the codes right now if you're not familiar with DSPD. So I just listed what the titles are, but there's only specific things that are covered with the caregiver compensation. But again, be open and honest with your DSPD transition coordinator and also your SCE about the type of support you need. And again, all of this information will be listed in the mega book that we've been creating to help you. It'll break apart every single waiver. It'll break apart all of the different aspects of each waiver and what comes with it. Because it's not just one thing, it's based on what's best for your loved one. Okay, so let's talk about payment methods here. And this can get a little confusing, so I want to make sure we understand it so that you can apply what we talk about later in the presentation. So here I have Jackson. He's now in waiver services. I have chosen a day program for him to go to, and that's a provider. And then I'm also going to have my neighbor help, which is SAS, which is self-administered. But then I also want to receive caregiver compensation. So it's possible to use either one of those or a combination of all of those. So with SAS, it's self-administered. Again, it's you're hiring, you're training, you're supervising the employees, you're turning in the timesheets, and your SCE, they are your best friend. Don't be afraid to call your SCE if you have questions. If you have questions about timesheets, if you have questions about employee information or how to hire somebody, you would need any question you have. Once you get into waiver services, you work with your SCE, your support coordinator. That's their job. That's what they get to do. You don't need to feel bad about asking them questions. So a provider is an agency or a company or know, a program, somebody who would come through a company support living in your home, or it's somebody you did not hire, you just selected them to be your provider. And if you have questions about this, put it in the chat and we can answer those for you. But again, it is possible to have a combination. You don't just have to pick one or the other. So your support coordinator or your SCE is a vital piece of your experience. Like I said, they're there to advocate for you and will help you navigate your waiver, funding, and caregiver compensation. If you choose to utilize it, all of these bullet points are different pieces of the duties of your SCE and what they're required to do and how it impacts caregiver compensation. If you have a question about it, you can reach out to the Utah Parent Center, or if you're uncomfortable discussing it with anyone, please contact DSPD directly. And that guide that we've built for you talks about how to file grievances. And then quickly, your fiscal agent, if you choose caregiver compensation, it is part of that self-administered program. And so you are required to hire a fiscal agent. Just be mindful that the rates between providers may be different. So if you choose a provider that has a higher rate, that's great, but it will impact your overall budget. So you need to be really selective on who you hire and be mindful of you're hiring the best person for your situation, but it also has ramifications one way or another on your budget. Okay, I'm going to turn the time over to Deanna. And Deanna, do you want me to just keep sharing my slides, or do you want to share your own slides?
Well, I've got the slides pulled up. I guess, let me see if I can, let me just try to.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share the screen. Let me grab that one. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, so we are going to talk about the caregiver compensation, and what we're trying to do here is to just help you guys understand different terminology, help you guys understand what some good questions might be to ask, know what is right for your family, and know where to find information, and maybe understand current dynamics in the state of Utah. And of course, to be a self-advocate for yourself and for your family. So caregiver compensation talks about, it focuses on where you live and what is the relationship that you have with the person that you are caring for. You can consider caregiver compensation whether you're caring for a child with a disability, or maybe you're caring for an elderly parent that you might have. So you have to understand that caregiver compensation can be considered similar in similar models like that. So when you have questions, also think about, perhaps that caregiving might be in a different setting. You also need to be on the Medicaid waiver, which Jenny was explaining that earlier, where you want to actually make sure that you're receiving services and not just necessarily the one-time funding. This saves money for the state of Utah, and it has the family in what's considered difficult. You'll receive difficulty of care payments, and that's a piece of language that you want to be familiar with, especially as you're talking to an accountant or other people too. And you'll be receiving these payments as you keep your loved one in their home versus them being put into an institution or being vulnerable for being placed into an institution. So we're looking at this IRS notice 2014-7. 2014-7 is something that was published by the IRS back in 2014. Also was applied back in that time. It's just that in the state of Utah, we haven't had this permanently approved since really this last spring. So these are things that we're wanting to address now, and also be familiar with the term HCBS, which is Home and Community-Based Services. And that's the book that Jenny mentioned earlier that we've been at the Utah Parent Center trying to publish information on that. So when you do an internet search, you want to search IRS Notice 2014-7. That is what's going to help you learn the information that you need. And you can see a window that's right over to the right-hand side. That would be an example of something that would come up. The same language for that would be difficulty of care payments. So, or Medicaid waiver payments. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So let me go ahead and tap here. Oh, hold on. Let me make sure it's going. Jenny, can you see that? I hope I'm not frozen. Here we go. Let me just go ahead and click for that. I apologize. Okay, so what we want to look at is we want to actually look at, let me see if I can go back maybe 2 slides. I apologize. I think my screen might have, Jenny, am I freezing up?
You are. So do you want me to share?
Yes, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to just go ahead and close out of this myself. Okay.
Okay.
I apologize, you guys.
No, you're good. Can you guys see my screen?
I can. And if you can go back maybe 2 other windows, maybe 1 more. Yes. Okay. So that's where we're at. So the internet search, we talked about that. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Now for your financial eligibility, we're going to talk about some things here, and we just kind of wanted to clarify this as our noon session got a little bit confusing. If you have a loved one that has a disability under the age of 18, they will look at benefit programs will look at the parent's income and assets, including DSPD. But there's an exception. If the exception is if your child has received a Medicaid waiver before they were at the age of 18, they will look only at your child's asset and income. So that's what the term waiver is all about, is that it's not looking at the parent's income, but looking at the child's income. If your loved one with a disability is over the age of 18, then they will only look at the individual's income and assets. So we just kind of wanted to clarify that when we're talking about the eligibility for different income programs, whether they'll be looking at the parent's income for individuals or children under the age of 18, or if they're looking at the individual's income based on their age of 18, or if they have been awarded a Medicaid waiver. So go ahead and let's advance. So we also had a question earlier, and maybe I should have put this slide someplace else, is if a family is divorced, what happens there? And I did get an answer to that. And I do have a family that I serve. And we do have the parents actually receiving caregiver compensation. It's also, it depends on the situation. It depends on the parenting time. It depends on final decision making. It depends on lots of different things. So that's something where you'll want to make those phone calls and ask those questions. So that's not something where we can give advice on that today, but you can still be eligible for caregiver compensation, even if you are divorced and a single parent. So let's go ahead and advance. So every family is unique. So I have 5 different little family scenarios. And so this is where receiving caregiver compensation can be a little bit complex, but we're going to rely back on that original information of the financial eligibility. So let's go ahead and look at family A. So in this family, you have one parent that is actually working full-time, and the family has health insurance through that employer. So in this situation, they probably don't need to worry about the family maintaining health insurance and receiving social services or being financially eligible for social services like Medicaid for the rest of the family. Okay, so that's family scenario A. Family scenario B is where you have a full-time working parent, but maybe they're doing something like construction or plumbing, and they don't have health insurance available to them. So in this situation, the family might need to remain on Medicaid and maintain their financial eligibility for Medicaid services. In this situation, they would want to be careful about how much caregiver compensation that they're actually pulling to not increase over that financial eligibility piece. And I'll show you some tables. In family number C, you have a single mom 3 children. 2 of the children have special healthcare needs or a disability, and mom has special healthcare needs. So this is a situation where a family, they really need that Medicaid coverage, and they would not want to compromise their eligibility from their income that they're receiving with caregiver compensation. Maybe receiving 10 hours, 15 hours, or 20 hours would be appropriate. Based on if the mom is receiving child support, or if the mom is receiving alimony, if they're receiving Social Security. All of these different types of resources or gross income are the things that are relevant as they work with workforce services or Social Security. Family number D, here you have a housing voucher with a family, and the housing voucher might be worth $30,000 a year. In this situation, the mom has been working part-time and now receiving caregiver compensation. She won't want to receive all of that money as caregiver compensation because she might not want to or be prepared to bump out that housing voucher. Family number E would be a single mom with her son with a disability and with a grandpa with a disability. So all 3 of those members of that family have a disability. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, so every family is unique, and every family needs a foundation to raise their child with a disability. Some of us are scared to pass away. I also have a son with a disability. He is 27, and he does receive DSPD funding. So every family wants to have a unique foundation for them. And remember that some of the information that families might have might also be private. It might not be something that they want to share. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So here you can see 2 different homes. We've got the family on the rocks and the family on the bricks. So, we want to shore up those foundations. So let's advance to the next slide. So here you can, and that slide is animated. So here you can see different services that a family might want to have to ensure that their family is safe and secure and being taken care of. So for my son that is 27 years of age, he does have Medicaid. He does have DSPD. I am his legal guardian. If there was ever a problem, he might have SNAP, which is supplemental nutrition for families. So depending on what's happening and where he is living, we might tap into different benefits for him. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So we have a list of resources at the Utah Parent Center that are Utah-related disability resources. So when you see those bricks up there, we do have the links of where you can go and learn more about those type of resources. So let's go ahead and advance. So these are different disability programs. So remember, some disability programs might come from a nonprofit organization like the Utah Parent Center, Special Olympics, private organizations like ABA therapy or food from a grocery store or private health insurance, federal services, so like Social Security, Medicare, and then state services like DSPD, Medicaid, food stamps, independent living centers. But we also want to make sure that we kind of keep our eligibility for the various programs that are out there based on a family's needs. So let's advance. So here you can see, Jenny shared this slide. So I just wanted to remind you that sometimes when you're dealing with income that's coming from IRS notice 2014-7, that is considered Medicaid waiver income. So it's not typically the ARPA or the CARES funding, although you can still possibly not have that be tax deductible. But when you're looking at caregiver compensation in relation to the IRS 2014-7 notice, that is specifically related to Medicaid waiver dollars. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So here you can see, we talked about some of the federal programs, and you can see the umbrella of services that are over there. To the right, there are state disability programs and the umbrella of services that could that maybe a family might pull from for those disability services. So, but on top of that is workforce services. So workforce services is the agency in the state of Utah that gathers information about eligibility for particular programs, and also our financial eligibility and assets. So that is where all of that is housed, where Social Security can reference over to workforce services in the state of Utah to see if a family has the right assets or the right resources or the right income that's coming in to still be eligible for Social Security benefits. Same thing with the state of Utah. DSPD can tap into workforce services database to see what the eligibility is, or for a housing voucher or for food stamps. So I just kind of wanted to give you that overall understanding of how these agencies interrelate. And remember that there is an unwinding of the public health emergency from COVID. And with that, what is true in the past might not be accurate in the future as we are moving and all of the different services and the service requirements are unwinding and and things are a little bit more relative to our assets and our financial eligibility now. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, remember, every family is unique. So we have these 5 families right here, and we're going to look at family settings of 4, and I'm going to share with you some of the income tables that a family might need. So when you're sharing information with others, remember that your family doesn't look the same as other families. And so each one of these families are just slightly different. And we do want to look after the best interest of each and every family. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So, and that one's animated. So SNAP benefits is food stamps. So it's supplemental nutrition for families. So let's go ahead and look at this. The family size of a family of 4. The max gross income that they can receive is $3,007 for their food stamp award of $939. If an individual is receiving more money in caregiver compensation, maybe child support or spousal maintenance, and their Social Security, if they are possibly receiving more than that $3,007, their food stamp award of almost $1,000 will wipe away. So we want to be very intuitive and be thoughtful about what each family needs. And that's where you're going to want to call workforce services and learn about the various things that are excludable in earned income or in unearned income. So we want to be thoughtful in this because we don't want a family suddenly not having $1,000 for food and be surprised by that. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So Medicaid benefits, and that's animated too. So we're going to go back to that family of 4. If they are on the medical needy family, then a household family size of 4 would need to be below $3,325 to continue to receive Medicaid benefits for the entire family. So remember that family of 4 where it was a single mom with 2 children with a disability and mom had special health care needs. This again is a situation where that family, even though they have a Medicaid waiver for 1 child, they still need to keep those Medicaid benefits in place for the other child that does not have a Medicaid waiver and for mom. So that's again where this family of 4 is going to want to stay in income, maybe around less than $1,000. You want to give yourself a little bit of a cushion for mistakes. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So CHIP benefits, so that is for the children's health insurance plan. That is where you would have a spend down. So if you go over that income, so a family of 4 right there is $5,000, you would have a spend down. Your spend down might be $500, $1,000, $2,000. You don't know what your spend down will be until you give your information to workforce services and ask all of those questions. And they are very helpful and they will answer any of the questions that you have. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Social Security benefits. Receiving Social Security for your minor child is another way for your child to receive Medicaid insurance. So here and this one's a little bit different, but here for a family with two parents, and say that dad is a contractor for construction or a plumber, doesn't get health insurance, but they need that health insurance for their daughter. So their income, the max that they're going to want to receive is $5,152. For the one ineligible child because they have another daughter. So they want to keep their income lower than that. This is a picture, a screenshot of the Social Security mobile wage reporting app. When you receive Social Security and you have a minor child that you're receiving that for, they're looking at the income of the parents. So, and then you will report your income in that app. Now, remember that slide way back at the beginning, when they're over the age of 18, we are then going to only look at the income of your child. They would call it an adult disabled child that has income. So my son is 27. He works at Buffalo Wild Wings. We would report his income into that Social Security app as he's receiving Social Security benefits. And remember, Social Security is always 3 months behind. Okay, let's go ahead and advance to the next slide.
And just a clarification on that too, if I have an 8-year-old son who's in waiver services, how would that impact reporting?
Okay, so yes, very good question. So if you have an 8-year-old son that is receiving waiver services, they don't look at your income. They're looking at the income of the child. So you want to make sure you don't have a money market account in your child's name. You don't want to have like huge savings accounts sitting in your child's name, because when you come off services, you might not be financially eligible. And workforce services does track if you're moving assets around. Those are things that they watch and even shadow. So those are things to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Over here, your housing benefits. So say you have that one mom that had 2 children and one has a disability. On here, she would not want to compromise her with receiving too much caregiver compensation by compromising her housing voucher. And I've had individuals that this has happened to. So what you do is you need to maybe work 10, 15, or 20 hours of caregiver compensation based on if you're receiving child support or alimony, those types of things. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So remember, you always call to get the right answer for your family. You call Social Security and you ask the questions that you need to ask. And that's why we're giving you this information about difficulty of care, the IRS notice 2014-7, because those are the questions that you need to ask. Call the Department of Workforce Services. They are the ones that you go through for your Medicaid waivers. So if you are receiving services, you want to make these telephone calls. If you have a child that is receiving a waiver, they are not looking at your income anymore. And as long as you're not actually receiving social services, you would be fine. But if you are receiving social services, you would want to be a little bit more thoughtful of how much caregiver compensation you're pulling at that moment. That doesn't mean that that mom that has 2 children that's receiving a housing voucher that has a value of $30,000 can't one day make a plan to then have to pay for her own rent, but she needs to be prepared for that. And be saving up for that. And there are plans to become independent. So that's another thing to talk about at another time. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So these are examples, and this is animated, where there could be exceptions. So that past plan to achieve self-support. If you designate a live-in aid for a housing voucher, I have families that I've helped get a housing voucher, but I have their caregiver that's receiving caregiver compensation designated as the live-in aid. So then if they are designated as the live-in aid for the housing voucher, the housing HUD does not look at the live-in aid's income. It could be just a totally random person, or it could be a family member. So those are things to keep in mind. The temporary assistance for needy families is, again, another benefit in there, the Medicaid Work Incentive Program, because they do want to encourage individuals to actually work that are receiving Medicaid, and the PASS, a plan to achieve self-support. These are exceptions, but you need to call Workforce Services or your agency specialist and case manager yourself. These phone calls are very difficult for me to make for my own self or for my own son. So those are phone calls that you can do with your support coordinator. Those are phone calls that you can do with a friend. Those are phone calls that you just call anybody and say, please sit with me for an hour while I make some hard phone calls. So just try to be super brave and get that information, because it's very helpful for, you know, your family. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So you also want to understand that caregiver compensation is not designed to be contributing towards your Social Security work credits. So you need 10 credits to pull Social Security retirement benefits yourself. So maybe you don't want to pull caregiver compensation. Maybe you want to utilize a day program so that you can work full-time yourself. I just want you to be aware of that. Who knows? If you are paying for workers' compensation insurance, if you get injured on the job. So note that with your fiscal agent and the pay rate that you are actually receiving. How are you filling out your W-4 and how are you completing the employment packets? All of these things are just important considerations. So let's advance to the next slide. So log into your Social Security online account and find out how much you would get for retirement, or log in what your spouse's retirement award will be, because if you don't have those 10 work credits, you're going to get half of what your spouse is if you are married. Another point is, if I have one gal that because I take care of families that the state of Utah assigns me that are on the DSPD wait list, to shore them up and secure them and strengthen them with all the benefits or the things that they need to support their family. I do have one family that she became disabled at the age of 24, and she didn't have enough work credits for her children to receive a child credit, being a disabled person herself. So you do kind of want some of those work credits. Let's go ahead and advance. Remember, there will be required documents that you complete with your fiscal agent that will designate that you do live with the person that you are providing care for, that you are, how you are related. So there are different forms based on the different fiscal agents that you will complete documents for. Okay, the next slide. And remember your W-4, be sure to make sure you're filling that out correctly for what you are wanting for your caregiver compensation to be. So let's go ahead and advance to the next one. Your W-2 will come back. Different fiscal agents and different family scenarios bring you back a W-2 that might be different. Maybe you have a W-2 that's completely zeroed out. You might have a W-2 that reports exactly how much income that you actually received in caregiver compensation. You might have some taxes withdrawn. So based on whatever is what your W-2 looks at is then in some ways how you'll want to actually file. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. So when is all of these things irrelevant? Maybe if we win the lottery, maybe if our child does get a Medicaid waiver and they're not looking at our income as a parent and we don't need social services at this time. There are lots of different scenarios. Let's advance to the next slide. So here is our 1040 Schedule 1. This is exactly where you would report your income for caregiver compensation, and then where you would back it back out. So if you look at line 8S, I believe it is. Yes, it is. That is where you will back out your income. So let's go ahead and advance this again, but in that line, you are going to scribble down or on the computer, write down IRS Notice 2014-7, difficulty of care. So let's advance to the next slide. Okay, so here you can actually volunteer to report your caregiver compensation so you can get your earned income tax credit and also receive your additional child tax credit. So your 1040, there is a spot. The 2020 tax returns have actually been updated to accommodate difficulty of care payments or the language of Medicaid waiver payments. So you want to stay familiar to that and help your accountant be familiar with that, or as you're filing your taxes yourself, be familiar with that language. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next one. So remember, we all want to raise our families and we want to have a really great, strong foundation. So and it's all based on our own unique settings. Let's go ahead and advance to the next one. So we also want to remember that there is caregiver burnout. So maybe there might be a year in your life where you've had some, crazy things happening that maybe caregiver compensation isn't a good option for that moment, or maybe it is. But remember, you can always convert those funds into different funds and then, say a day program, and then later, utilize your caregiver compensation again. But if you don't use it, you will lose your DSPD funding. So make sure you're utilizing every dollar. Let's go ahead and advance. So remember, call Social Security, call Workforce Services, let them know what your income situation is and have them determine if your income or your assets or payments going into your bank accounts are to be reportable or excluded. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah, this next slide is just all about the Utah Parent Center. Just remember that we are funded through grants, and we do appreciate any donations that come to the Utah Parent Center or supporting our activities, our auctions, our fundraisers, all of those things so that we can continue to bring these types of presentations to you. And once again, we just want to remind you that the Utah Parent Center is unable to provide tax advice. Please work with a tax professional on this question. Refer to those links that we put in the chat earlier or share that information.